The morning began with a kind of softness usually reserved for the quietest days of the year, light drifting through the thin curtains of the wooden house like pale gold dust, warm enough to feel comforting, gentle enough to make Diep breathe slower than usual. It wasn't exhaustion that kept her in bed a few extra seconds. It was anticipation. A quiet, tender weight that pulsed lightly beneath her ribs. Today was the day of her very first prenatal checkup. For a long breath, she simply listened, to the faint rustle of wind outside, and more loudly, to James in the kitchen attempting what sounded like an orchestra of clinking cups, shuffling utensils, and hurried footsteps. He'd barely slept. When she finally stepped out into the main room, James froze mid-motion. One foot lifted slightly off the floor, a mug of steaming ginger tea suspended in his hand like a fragile specimen he feared might explode. "Oh, you're awake," he blurted, trying, and failing, to sound casual. "I was just about to bring this to you." Diep touched his hand lightly as she accepted the cup. "Thank you." He leaned in immediately. "Careful, it might be too hot. Or, maybe not hot enough." "Let me check first, James," she laughed. "I can hold a cup." He nodded, but his eyes never left her, following each movement as though she carried something too precious for the world to risk losing. Which, in a way, she did. Before she could say anything more, NHI came skidding into the room, her socks sliding on the wooden floor like tiny skis. "Is today the day? The baby checkup day?" she asked, bright-eyed and breathless. "Yes," Diep said, and NHI clapped so enthusiastically she nearly toppled over. "I packed my bag already," she declared proudly. "Snacks, notebook, pencils, and a soft scarf." "In case the baby gets cold," James blinked. "The baby isn't going to be cold at the clinic." NHI stared at him as though he'd said the sky might fall. "You don't know that." Diep hid her smile behind her hand. The energy in the house vibrated with excitement, joyful, nervous, sweet, as though all three of them were standing at the beginning of something quietly monumental. By late morning, everyone was ready. Or rather, Diep and NHI were ready, while James conducted a one-man disaster preparedness drill. "Appointment card? In my bag," Diep answered patiently. "Water bottle? Right here." "And you ate something?" "A little," he frowned. "Should you eat more? What if?" "James," Diep said gently, touching his arm. "I'm okay." He exhaled, inhaled again, trying to be calm, failing, trying again, and finally nodded. Then he opened the front door with the solemnity of a man escorting royalty. Outside, the noon sun lay across the fields like a warm blanket. The orchard shimmered. Leaves swayed in slow, unhurried rhythms. Birds pecked along the path as if welcoming them out of the house. James helped Diep into the car as though she were carved from porcelain. NHI buckled in the back, leaned forward, and whispered excitedly. What if we hear the heartbeat today? James swallowed. We might, and if we do, NHI continued, will it sound like thump thump? Or boom boom? Or tick tick tick? Diep laughed softly. We'll find out soon enough. James gripped the steering wheel like he was preparing to drive through a storm, even though the road was smooth, familiar, uncomplicated. He drove so slowly that two motorbikes overtook them and glanced inside, wondering if something was wrong. Why are we moving like a turtle? NHI asked. I'm being careful, James said, eyes fixed ahead. We're not carrying the baby on the roof, NHI muttered. The baby is inside Diep. Diep stifled another laugh. She placed a hand over her stomach, still flat, no movement yet, too early for that. But the thought of the tiny life growing there filled her with a warm, swelling pride she hadn't expected to feel so soon. James kept glancing at her every few seconds. You okay? I'm okay. 1 minute later, still okay? Still okay, James. 2 minutes after that. You sure? Yes, love, Diep said, closing her eyes with a smile. I'm sure. NHI kicked the back of his seat. Stop asking. She's fine. I'll tell you if she's not. James sighed deeply and stopped asking, but not worrying. They reached the small town. The familiar bakery with its warm bread smell, the fruit vendors arranging their displays, the fabric shops with bright rolls stacked in the windows, the tiny park with 2 old exercise machines no one ever touched. At the clinic, he parked with exaggerated precision, as though docking a spacecraft. Stay there, he ordered. Don't get out yet. I'll help you, James, she said gently, I can stand. I know, but just go slowly. Inside, the clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic mixed with lemongrass, a strangely soothing combination. Soft footsteps echoed down the corridor. Somewhere, a baby cried in rhythmic, sleepy bursts. They waited on a small bench. NHI hummed lightly. Diep folded her hands neatly. James vibrated like an anxious machine. Stop shaking the bench, NHI whispered. I'm not shaking it, he whispered back. You are. Diep placed her hand on his. Instantly, he stilled. Sorry, he murmured. I'm just nervous. I know. A moment later, the nurse called. Diep? James stood so quickly he nearly tripped. NHI hopped up too, but the nurse held up a hand. Sorry, sweetheart. Only 2 people. The room is small. But I packed my notebook, NHI protested, devastated. Diep knelt and brushed her cheek. You wait right here. We'll tell you everything. NHI nodded reluctantly. Okay. But listen really well so you don't forget anything. James rested a hand on her head. I promise. Inside the exam room, the air smelled of lavender and clean cotton. The doctor asked questions, routine ones, and Diep answered calmly. James stood beside her, nodding at everything, sometimes twice. You seem a little nervous, the doctor said with a grin. Diep answered for James. He's excited. The doctor chuckled and rolled the ultrasound machine closer. I think, he said gently, we might be able to hear something today. Diep's breath hitched. James's stopped. The lights dimmed. Shadows deepened. The world seemed to shrink until there was only the machine, the doctor's hands, James's trembling fingertips hovering next to Diep's. The doctor placed the probe on her lower belly. A beat of silence. 2 beats. 3. Nothing but the hum of the machine and James's grip tightening around her hand. Then. A flicker on the monitor. A pulse of sound. Soft at first, then clear, quick, undeniably alive. Thump 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 thump. Not like an adult heartbeat, slower, heavier. This was bright. Urgent. Fluttering like a tiny bird beating its wings inside a sheltered nest. Diep gasped. James jolted as if struck. There it is, the doctor said softly. James choked on a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He pressed his hand to his mouth, but that didn't stop the tears. They rushed out too fast, overflowing and rolling down his cheeks with no hesitation, no shame. Diep turned her head, her own eyes full. Honey, he shook his head, unable to speak. His voice had been stolen by something larger, relief, joy, awe. The tiny heartbeat filled the room, steady and bright, echoing like the beginning of a future neither of them had dared to imagine too clearly. James pressed his forehead to Diep's hand, crying openly. That's, he tried, voice breaking. That's our baby. Diep smiled through tears. Yes, the doctor continued with gentle professionalism. Everything looks healthy. Strong heartbeat. Very good for this stage. James cried harder. He leaned down, pressing his cheek to Diep's belly, whispering into the fabric, I hear you. I hear you. The doctor let the heartbeat play longer than usual, as though he sensed how much they needed this moment to sink in, to become something they could carry with them forever. Finally, he printed a small ultrasound image. James held it like a sacred artifact, hands trembling, lips parted in disbelief. It's real, he whispered. It's really real. Diep touched his arm. It is. He kissed her forehead gently. Thank you, for this. For everything. We did this together. When they stepped back into the waiting area, NHI sprang up immediately. What happened? Did you hear it? Did it sound like boom boom or tick tick or? She froze when she saw James's red eyes. Oh no, she gasped. Were you scared? No, Diep laughed. He was happy. Happy people cry sometimes, James said, clearing his throat, failing to hide the wobble. NHI wrapped her arms around him. It's okay. I didn't hear it, but I bet it was beautiful. It was, he whispered. He handed her the ultrasound print. NHI held it like a butterfly. It's so small. Like a bean. A very important bean, Diep said. The most important bean, NHI declared. The drive home was peaceful, the kind of silence that felt warm and full, not empty. Diep rested a hand over her belly. James drove normally now, glancing at her with small, disbelieving smiles. You heard it too, right? I did, and it was fast, very fast, and strong. Strong, she agreed. I didn't know a sound could do that to me, he murmured. I didn't know either. In the back seat, NHI drew the entire scene in her notebook. The monitor, the doctor, the zigzag heartbeat line. She held up her sketches. Was it like this? Or more like this? And James, miraculously patient, answered every single question. When they reached home, the orchard glowed warm and golden. Birds danced along the branches. The breeze felt like soft applause. James opened Diep's door and held out both hands. She accepted, not because she needed help, but because she loved that he offered it with tenderness instead of panic. Halfway to the porch, he stopped. What's wrong? She asked. His eyes filled again. Nothing. I can still hear it. Diep's heart swelled. I know. Me too. He placed his hand over her belly. She placed hers over his. That tiny sound, he whispered, changed everything. Inside, NHI carefully taped the ultrasound picture onto the refrigerator. Now everyone who comes over, she announced proudly, will know there's a baby in this house. James wrapped his arms around Diep's waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. You did amazing today, he whispered. So did you. I cried, he said with a small laugh. Crying counts, she answered softly. When it comes from love. Outside, the orchard rustled. Inside, the wooden house felt warmer than ever, as though the heartbeat they heard earlier still echoed through the walls. Some moments arrive softly, but change everything. And today, Diep and James learned that sometimes the smallest sound, no louder than a flutter, can mark the beginning of an entirely new life.